So here's how I'd do Candle Cove for television. First of all, I wouldn't. It doesn't work in an episodic format unless you invent more story, which ruins its appeal. The original story became popular because it was unexplained, brief, and a look into a random event. Changing that changes what Candle Cove is entirely. But let's say someone put a gun to my head and told me to adapt Candle Cove for television. And by the way, I'm not even sure you can say gun on YouTube anymore, so watch for this video to be demonetized. First, let's very quickly address how I feel Channel Zero's adaptation of the story fell flat. It worked the entire story into the first episode, undermining the suspense and mystery. Then it explained how and why the show came to exist, once again undermining the suspense and mystery. The writers decided that they would use the go-to explanation for every bad Creepypasta and Candle Cove spin-off ever written. Child murders. There's nothing wrong with that, fictional ones at least, but when it comes to Hollywood adaptations of stories like these, there seems to be one motto they live by. A human did it!
A wizard did it.
I see, alright, yes. But in episode AG4...
Wizard.
For Glaven out.
Whether it's a virus, possession, or psychic abilities, the story usually seems to boil down to the easiest possible explanation. Hey y'all, that inexplicable eldritch phenomenon? It was just some dude. I could go on, but nobody wants that. So here's how I'd do Candle Cove for television. First and foremost, this would not be a direct adaptation of the story, but would rather take place in the same universe. The events written in Candle Cove happened. They're in the past. In this world, all of those events actually occurred. This is what I had hoped they were going to do with No End House. They could have easily made an entirely different house and entirely different characters, while still acknowledging that the written story actually took place, just in a different time and at a different location. Instead, they fundamentally changed what the house was and what it did, invalidating the original story completely. At least in my mind. Maybe the houses are just that different each time. Anyway, back to Candle Cove. Each episode would be split into two distinct sections. Each episode would begin with an Ironton-based support group for parents of missing children. Don't get ahead of me, it's not what you think. We would get to know the random, mismatched participants in this group and the therapist running the meetings. The key here would be interesting characters. A curmudgeonly plumber who just wants to yell all the time and keeps talking about killing whoever took his boy. The meek accountant who tried to kill himself because he couldn't handle the grief of losing his daughter. The broken soccer mom who's self-medicating with her kid's excess Adderall. You know, actual characters, all different ages from different eras, all with a child who disappeared suddenly and without explanation. They can't get closure, and that's what ties them together. A desperation for answers none of them will receive. The latest missing child is Juniper, the daughter of a hipster couple who are new to the group. I picked a J name to pay respect to Janice, who was completely written out of Channel Zero, and to select a name that would be somewhat unique for reasons that will become clear. When our main character, the therapist, visits with family, one of her young relatives is seated in front of a television. From the child's perspective, we watch the second half of the show, an actual episode of Candle Cove. For the second half of each episode, I would try to get Becky Sloan and Joseph Pelling, perhaps best known in our circle for their work on the web series Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. That's right. They worked on an episode of Gumball, so I mean it's within the realm of possibility. The actual show within a show would feature the characters made famous in the story. A young girl, pirate puppets, a talking ship, and one freaky-ass skeleton in a patchwork outfit. By the way, can we get Tim Curry for the Skin Taker? It's voice acting. I'm gonna say we can, and if we can't, then cancel the project and fuck the entire universe. Anyway, when we watch the puppet half of the Candle Cove adaptation, it would function similarly to Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, but not entirely. Each segment would feature a moral that makes no sense, and perhaps even a song. However, the surrealist overtones would be a bit more subtle. Each episode wouldn't break down like DHMIS, it would just be a gradual build-up across episodes. The main character in the puppet show, the young girl, is new to the pirate world. She's afraid of everyone until she gets to know them. She's far from home and lost. And yeah, it's Juniper. I mean, you knew that already. Channel Zero featured a child getting sucked into a show, but I feel like it was just used as a throwaway plot contrivance rather than an actual underpinning of the series itself. In my version, there is no explanation for how or why this happens, but the show needs a protagonist. The show needs a child. The show can't go on without a child. End the first episode by cutting back to the real world. The child watching television is told to come to dinner. But Juniper is lost and scared, the child calls back. Juniper? That's a fairly unique name. Lost? Scared? The therapist walks into the room to see what the child is talking about exactly. She's crying, see? The child says, pointing to the television. Static. Yeah, he's watching Static. We're going to burn that plot twist in the first episode too, but remember, this isn't a retelling of the original story. This is, in effect, a sort of spiritual sequel in television format. The child turns back to the television set, clearly seeing something others don't. I hope she gets home soon, he sighs. Me too, the therapist remarks, looking confused and unsure what to say about the situation. Me too. I'm not going to lay out the rest of the series in depth, but I'll hit the bullet points. The therapist talks to the child's mother, who says that if he wants to watch Static each afternoon, then at least it keeps him out of her hair. The therapist begins talking to child psychologists. Some of them have treated children who had adverse effects to the final episode of a TV show that never existed. The therapist talks to her support group, approaching the subject very carefully and hiding her true intent in such a way as to not agitate the group members. Yes, their children used to watch Candle Cove too before they disappeared. The therapist holds a focus group of children at a local university, under the pretense of being a paid social experiment. She has them watch the show by turning a television to Static at the correct time. All the children give similar details about the show, their least favorite character being the skin taker. Some of them are more disturbed than others. Is his clothes made of real people skin? One timidly asks. As time progresses, the therapist becomes too involved, too willing to take risks. They begin involving members of the therapy group in a wild goose chase to find the creator of the show, the station it's being broadcast from, even just a TV guide listing for it. The therapist finds out there's a local convention with a panel about lost shows, and the curmudgeonly plumber volunteers to drive out to it. Enraged by people being a fan of the thing that took his child, he instead shoots up the convention and is killed by the police. The addict soccer mom goes to a casting call for child actors, with the group reasoning that this might be how children are selected. She tries kidnapping someone else's child, convinced it's hers due to the vaguest of similarities. The accountant is tasked with bringing media attention to the show and the mystery around it, in the hopes that more people out there will help supply information. He does this by writing a note about the show and how it affected him before hanging himself. On top of that, the family refuses to release the note, as they don't want people to think he was insane. In other words, without openly stating it, if you start looking into the origins of Candle Cove, bad things are going to happen to you. It's never directly shown or stated to be a curse, but it's apparent that either grief or supernatural influence will stop you from looking. Finally, the screaming episode of Candle Cove airs, again. The therapist, frazzled and ready to give up on everything, is called to the family home once again. The child who was previously watching the show is nearly catatonic with fear after watching the screaming episode. The therapist is the one who can get there the quickest that very night to find out what happened to mentally scar the child. Long story short, Juniper is gone. Where to? Who knows? The screaming episode is sort of like a final breaking down of the show format, a rebooting point where things are wiped clean and the show starts over with a new child. The therapist arrives in time to sit next to the child's bed. She asks to be left alone with him, mostly so she can talk to him about the show and discuss the problem without sounding crazy. That's when it happens. A cannon blast. A sudden storm. The rancorous call of pirates. Chaos. Imagine the scene from Poltergeist when the tree comes crashing through the window. In the child's room, and only in the child's room, a hurricane-force storm is breaking through into the house. Amid the earth-shaking, blinding storm that has come through the wall, the therapist can barely see a ship outside, riding an endless black sea. The ship doesn't look like a friendly puppet. It's warped. Wrong. The figures on board are little more than shadow and eyes like piercing white pinpricks of light. "Come aboard, matey!" a distant call breaks through the roar of wind. The child, now broken from his stupor, sits bolt upright. Unaffected by the wind, sure on his feet, without even a ripple in his pajamas, the boy walks toward the ship. Feeling the opposite effect, the therapist is thrown about, barely able to stand. Bones are broken, blood is spilled, furniture and toys smash and spin around them. But the therapist is able to reach the child and restrains him. "It's not real," the therapist screams, eyes closed tight. "Don't look. Stop watching. It isn't happening if you aren't looking." A close-up of the boy's wide, fear-stricken eyes as he suddenly closes them. All is normal. No storm, no broken furniture, no injuries. Just some concerned parents bursting in the door to see what the yelling was about. When they see the boy is up and around, they're more relieved than concerned. "Did you find out what you wanted to know?" the therapist is finally asked. "No," is the reply. "Well, you helped him," one of the parents says gratefully. "I guess," the therapist looks out the window. Nothing strange. "I guess that'll have to be enough." Unlike previous episodes, there isn't an entire second half of the puppet show. Instead, we're treated to only a few final moments aboard the laughingstock. "It's time to meet our new crewmate," says Percy. The camera pans to the cabin door. It doesn't open. Nothing. Static. The scene resets. "It's time to meet our new crewmate," says Percy. The camera pans to the cabin door. It doesn't open. Nothing. This happens one or two more times, but on the final repeat, the static is all that's left. So what is Candle Cove? Who knows? Is it over? Is it dead? Maybe, maybe not. Is this adaptation better than Channel Zero's? That's up for you to decide. But then again, who's to say this video was even real in the first place?